Ladies and gentlemen, the next session is Michigan's 21st Century, Governor Snyder's Commission Reports. Please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Detroit Regional Chamber and the Chair of the 21st Century Economy Commission, Sandy Baruah. President of Grand Valley State University and Chair of the 21st Century Education Commission, Thomas Haas. Governor for the state of Michigan, Rick Snyder. Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of Edward C. Levy Company and Chair of the 21st Century Infrastructure Commission, S. Evan Weiner. And to moderate the discussion, MiWeek anchor for Detroit Public Television, Christy, McDonald.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to see all of you from this vantage point. I've actually been sitting in the parlor of the Grand Hotel for 2 days straight, it feels like, with our coverage with Detroit Public Television. So it's nice to be out here on the main stage with all of you gentlemen and all of you out here this afternoon. I think it's really interesting when we finally sit down and we get to talk about now these commissions that were just announced, the last one finally yesterday with you, Sandy, with the Economic Commission. So what I'd really like to do is have each one of you talk about the findings. I think we could do probably a 30-minute panel on each one of these and all of the various aspects and impacts on the state of Michigan. But I'll have each one of you talk about your commission and what you found. And then if we could all look forward and say, all right, what is it going to take to put into practice a lot of the things or the highest recommendations that you were able to find here, knowing it's a long-term goal. But Governor, I guess I'm going to start with you. And when you first decided to make these commissions in 2016, why you picked the breakdown of infrastructure, education, and the economy.
Well, thanks, Christy, because they're the fundamental building blocks of an economy. And what we needed to do is step back and take a longer view of the world and to get Michiganders from all different backgrounds coming together in a nonpartisan, non-threatening fashion to say, let's talk about not the next term, not the next year, but the next generation and the generation after. How do we build for the long term? Because if you think about it, it's only common sense we should do this, and it's not traditionally done in the public sector. That's nuts. So let's move forward and get this done, and there was a natural order to it. You start with infrastructure. What are the bones, the physical assets you have to serve as your base? Beyond that, our most critical asset, most important thing is the talent, and what kind of educational system do we have to give them the skills they need to be successful, to lead us in that direction? And then finally, how do you put it all together in a cohesive, comprehensive package of what the future economy looks like? What are those trends and features and facets that could influence the direction we take? And then how we could turn that question around to say, instead of being influenced by it, how could we lead it? How could we make sure we're setting a direction and helping define how the world is right here in Michigan? So it was really to take those three building blocks, and each one of these commissions, these chairs did an awesome job, so thank you.
And I'm sure it wasn't the easiest task in the world. Evan, let me ask you, when you first got this and you have to sit there and say, all right, we got to get this report done, we've got to get it done in 8 months, here we go.
Right. Well, the governor had intentions for us to, in a matter of 8 months, put a 30 to 50-year plan together for infrastructure. And sometimes we think of infrastructure as just being roads, but it was roads and bridges, water, drainage, energy, communications. So he challenged us to be bold, and we looked at him and said, this is impossible. And I don't know if you heard the earlier stories today about the solid stare. He said, don't worry, you can do it. Well, anyway, the commission came together, and we did do it, and it wasn't easy, and it wasn't always fun. But what we discovered was that no other state in the country had put together a 21st century 30 to 50-year plan for all their infrastructure. So we really had to look around the world, and we really had to try to understand what the best practices were. We broke up into groups, and we took these different pieces of infrastructure, water, roads, energy, communications, and we studied them and would come back together and share what we had learned. And we did this after and during, actually, a time when we went out to the community. We got some good advice at the beginning, and be bold and go out and listen to the people. So we went to the Upper Peninsula. We were on the west side of the state. We were in the city of Detroit. We were in Flint. And we asked the people who actually have to pay for infrastructure, what do you want? And we learned some things that were important to the people that we really hadn't focused on. For example, broadband. People across the state said, we need to be connected. People want to work at home. They want to work in rural areas, and we have to deliver broadband. We also learned, interestingly enough, that there's 3,300 independent entities that are responsible for our infrastructure. How do you coordinate that? Think about it. Water systems, okay, sewer systems, transportation entities, 3,300. And that's a frightening thing. We learned that we don't really know enough about what's underneath the ground. Roads and bridges, we can evaluate, but we don't know enough about what's underneath the ground. And unfortunately, we've seen the results of that. All of us have. But there's a lot more we don't know. So the report's there, and there's over 100 recommendations. And I guarantee you can learn a lot about what the future state of infrastructure should be in Michigan. I can also assure you that if you suffer from insomnia and you get this report and read it, it'll solve your problem.
Now that is, that's quite a sell job there, Evan. Tom, let me ask you, before we go back to specific recommendations on infrastructure, Tom, let me ask you, in terms of going and talking to the community about education, because everybody has got an opinion about where we should be in the state of Michigan on education. What were some of the most interesting feedback you got from parents?
Well, what we saw with the outreach to the community is that there was interest, first and foremost, on that student, on that child. That was the North Star we heard from the community. Business communities, parents, early childhood providers, all these people in the continuum. The commission really looked at a P20 approach, prenatal through careers. And so we really went out to the community, both here in the Traverse City area. We went southeast, southwest, up to the UP electronically. So we did hear from the community. And what we saw was great alignment in terms of our conversations, and I too had 25 people that were eclectic and mixed, but coming together on that vision. And the vision we had developed was to have our state have the talent necessary to go through this next century, the skill sets necessary, having meet international standards high, and then have the credentials to career. That was the vision. But we also understood that this whole effort, and it was mentioned by my colleague, that education is a public good. And it truly is. In fact, you look at the '63 Constitution, it calls out education and the maintenance of education as a public good. But I went back. Where it really starts is the Northwest Ordinances of 1787, talking about education as a public good. And so this conversation, by pushing us now into this next century, as we had with the other commissions, really wanted to be bold and transformational. We had 9 principles and 32 recommendations that were achieved with consensus across this very broad, eclectic, wonderful group of individuals aligned with the conversations we had with the citizens across the state.
That's impressive to have that kind of consensus in education. Sandy, let me ask you, when you took on the economy piece of this, were there any assumptions that you made that you all of a sudden found were totally wrong in this process when you went into it?
Well, yeah, the first one was that, there's no way we can get this done in 6 months. I was really envious that Evan had 8 months, to do his commission report.
How come you only had 6?
Well, because our scope was smaller. It was to create an economic blueprint for the next 20 years and beyond. So,
just...
So no, I tell you, I'll tell you what we did learn very, very quickly. First of all, we went to school very much on the great work of Evan's commission and Tom's commission. These are incredibly high quality pieces of work that we just, built upon and frankly stole from, which really helped us get our work done in 6 months. We wouldn't have been able to do it without the great work of Tom and Evan. But we rallied around, 4 themes, education, obviously, infrastructure, obviously, business conditions, what is the business climate in our state, and quality of life. And each 4 of those really kind of has a headline. And education, or talent, we called it talent, and Tom, I know, will support me on this, is that if we don't get the talent equation right in this state, game over. That is the most important thing that we have to do. If you want to know where any state or region is going to rank on per capita income, all you have to do is look at their educational attainment. Those are exactly one for one. In fact, right now, Michigan is 34th in educational attainment, and we're 33rd in per capita income. And there isn't really a state in the nation where those numbers aren't very, very highly correlated. So if we want to move up the per capita income, we have to get more highly educated people, more people with professional skills certificates, more people with associate's degree, but particularly more people with bachelor's degrees, because I know it's a kind of a difficult issue to talk about, but when you look at the data, when you look at where the jobs have been created since the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008, all those jobs have gone to people with highly educated, with higher degrees.
Governor Snyder, do you think that we have the tools in place to be able to get that done, and what Sandy's talking about, and making sure that we have that talent pipeline?
We're putting those tools in place because it's a living thing. And so what I say is we've done a lot of great pieces. Everything when you talk about the talent occasion, because the whole concept is P20, prenatal through lifelong learning. So we've done a lot in early childhood where we've made much more accessible preschool for our kids. We've done pre-3 reading, because that's a huge issue. You need to be able to read by 3rd grade. Those outcomes we won't see for years, but we're starting to measure the near-term results. That's giant. Then you get to the high school, college age, and this is where you get the whole issue of career tech education, STEM, should be called STEAM, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. We're really seeing these pieces go in place. But we got a lot more work to do. An easy illustration is one area where we're lagging badly behind, and when I say we're lagging, the nation is in computer skills, in computer skill access, particularly in the K-12 system. There aren't a lot of classes offered, and you don't get credit towards the normal curriculum the way we should. So those are reforms we need to make.
All right, I want to go down to each one of you and give me, I think, the top 5 takeaways from each of the important commissions. Obviously, there are so many findings there, and you can't tackle all of them this year, next year, or maybe in 8 years from now. But Evan, I want you to talk a little bit about infrastructure and the key takeaways from what you were able to find in the report.
Well, we identified current state, we identified a future state, and the gaps in between and how to get there. The things that we had to do legislatively, how much it would cost, and what it would look like. And so I would say, just in summary, the current state is it's a state that we're not and should not be proud of. 40% of our roads are in poor condition. 1,200 of our bridges are deficient. We've got water issues everywhere. 25% of our beaches get closed every summer because of E. coli. And frankly, 5.7 billion gallons, that's a B, billion gallons of raw sewage get put into our watershed every year. It's not something that we want for our kids and grandkids. So the current state, if you will, is basically unacceptable. Now the future state is safe, reliable, affordable, and sustainable infrastructure. And that's really where we have to get to. And frankly, it's the responsibility of all of us, but it's the responsibility of our leaders and our legislators, in many cases, that have to make the hard decisions on how to get from A to B. So, takeaway. No, we can't do it ourselves, and we need that leadership. Now, what we learned is that best practices around the world look something like this. 1, there is a, if you will, master plan, an asset management plan. All the assets are, if you will, logged into a data system. Their condition is, and their performance is known, and therefore you can make investments in a coordinated and cooperative fashion, and you can tell the people, okay, this is what it's going to cost, this is what you're going to get. In some cases in Michigan, we have that. But in most cases, we don't, and we don't have it coordinated. So the governor has rolled out, and what we're going to see is in District 4 and 10, if you will, in Detroit and the arena around Detroit, Grand Rapids on the west side, we are going to see a plan to put into a system, a data system, if you will, what I call the master plan. The data has to be put in. So we got to know what we have and the condition of what we have. We don't today. 2, there should be a, if you will, infrastructure council. Now, in terms of what does that look like, there isn't anything like it in America today. We saw it in London. We saw it in actually Ontario. We saw it live and on the screen talking to people in New South Wales, Australia. This council is a group of experts, okay? Experts in infrastructure who take this data that we're talking about and in a coordinated fashion make recommendations to our leaders, future administrations, legislators, the communities, and the master planners themselves, the municipal planners themselves. This is the best way we can get prepared for building the economy, making sure educators get what they need. Here's how clean water, good roads, clean quality of life gets improved in the most cost-effective and efficient manner. Here's the map. This is how we get from A to B. And people, this is what it's going to cost, but this is what you're going to get. So those 2 pieces need to be done. The rest of it, in terms of how we build things and the quality and et cetera and so forth, we've got it. We can do that in Michigan. We've got the capabilities to do the, if you will, engineering and the work. But we have to have a plan. So that really, in terms of where we're going, is the most important thing. The last piece is that the people said, we'll be happy to pay for it. If it costs us $10 a month to have better roads, or $3 a household per month to have clean water, that's what we want. We're happy to pay for it if we know what we're going to get. Now it's up to us to take action and do what the people want.
I do want to have a conversation about what that final price tag will look like and where there might be a disconnect between what people say that they want and they would pay for and where legislation is right now. And I think that'll get to, that's the next final piece. But Tom, I want to go to you and talk a little bit about education and some of the top finds that you found in your commission report and what we're missing in Michigan.
Sure. I'm going to start off with context again. We're trying to create a framework that the policymakers could use over the next 10 years to impact 50 years from now. It was that type of bold vision, and we wanted to have a transformational plan, and I think it's there for the future leaders of the state of Michigan to use of this next decade. And what we did is looked at accountability, we looked at governance and structure, we looked at funding, but not through the continuum. We laid that on top of those particular themes. And what we got out of that by looking at Massachusetts, looking at across the globe, Finland and other countries across the globe, Ed Trust, one of the important takeaways is the urgency behind which we have to rally. We have to get this done now. We got to get started now. And I know it's a 50-year window, but we got to get started yesterday. And that's how urgency came through loud and clear. I think that when you then drill down in terms of the real efforts, again, 32 recommendations. Early childhood, the governor pointed out, keenly important to us. You got to get started on that. Then you look at looking at the teaching profession itself across the continuum. That is so important. Master teacher in the K through 12, we got to redo our notion of what it really means to be a teacher in this new system. Competency-based education. I'm really excited about this across the continuum as well. I've seen it in some states in the post-secondary. You can do it in the K through 12 world, but that's really exciting because then links that into the economic vitality, what the industry leaders and companies want out of our efforts. And so that's critically important. And I think, lastly, we got to look at the accountability and governance systems themselves to make sure that they are aligned with the vision.
All right. Sandy, what about you? Why don't you go ahead and tell us the main takeaways from the report you just released yesterday?
So first of all, everything is interconnected. Right, and I'm going to use the example of agriculture. So we did the similar listening tours, and we listened to people of all walks of life, all industries. But just to use agriculture. So Michigan has the second most diverse agriculture state in the nation, second to only California. We have an incredibly dynamic and prosperous agriculture industry. But here's what we heard from the agriculture folks. One, The state of our infrastructure is preventing them from expanding, and it is a negative factor in terms of their ability to stay in Michigan. Even simple examples such as the roads in some places are in such bad condition that the produce gets bruised and damaged on its way to wherever it's supposed to go. So the agriculture producers say, well, we can't expand because our produce is getting damaged. Secondly, water infrastructure. We don't have the water infrastructure, clean water infrastructure to either irrigate our crops or handle our wastewater. And also the community that we're resident in also has that same challenge. So we need to invest in water infrastructure that helps both industry and the community. And then finally, listen, agriculture is not just picking apples off of a tree. I mean, these are high-tech jobs now. We need the education system to be able to produce that kind of talent. And so the theme of our report at a very, very high level was trying to bring all these things together. I kind of mentioned the headline on talent. The headline on infrastructure is that, we need a different approach, a different ethos, if you will, for infrastructure investment in this state than we have had for the last generation or so. I mean, think of Michigan as our family house. If we have a tough couple financial years, yeah, we disinvest a little bit for a couple years and then we have to catch up later. Well, you can only do that for 1 or 2 years. If you do it for 40 years, then you end up with a bill that Evan has just given us, which is billions upon billions of dollars.
With a B, yeah, exactly. I think it's very interesting, though. What about attracting business here to the state of Michigan? Do we have enough tools in place are we doing a good enough job at that? And so businesses want to either relocate here, do business here, and kind of in turn then grow the population?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say Michigan is doing a good job now with that. We can do better. And there's pieces of legislation right now, the Good Jobs for Michigan legislation that's working through the Senate right now is good. But the thing that is really going to win these battles for investment is talent. I mean, companies will go where the talent is. That is the #1 attractor. When you look at taxation rates are important. There's no doubt about it. But taxation rates are a value proposition. Mm-hmm. There's a reason companies flock to Seattle and Boston, and it's not because they're getting a great deal on taxes, right? These are high-tax states. They are going there because of the talent.
All right, so Governor Snyder, now you have these 3 reports to take a look at. How do you balance the urgency? We talk about when Tom says the urgency of we're dealing with our kids who are in schools right now. How do you balance the sense of urgency with getting a few things done quickly or within the first several months here now of receiving these reports with this is also a long-term plan that you may not have control of executing, once you're out of office?
Yeah, well, the good part, Christy, is I think we recognize that as we went through this process. So as you looked at these recommendations, they tend to fall in short-term ones, intermediate-term ones, and longer-term objectives, and how you can take these in a staged fashion. And Evan gave an illustration already on the infrastructure report. One of the most important things was the Integrated Asset Management Pilot Program. That's been kicked off, and we're doing Southeast Michigan and West Michigan working together on that. So we're starting to build that map. And so that's critically important. On the education side, if you start looking at, we're already doing some good work. I appreciate Brian Whiston's work on the accountability piece, on ADAF in terms of looking at that. But competency-based learning is a huge opportunity, and how we're already working together on those kind of projects with experiential programs like FIRST Robotics and some of those neat programs that I'll talk about later. But those are fundamental ways of doing education a different way. So a lot of these are taking place. And then when you come to the question about the tools and the business climate, I appreciate Sandy's comments, but we just did a press conference on the Good Jobs for Michigan package. We have a great toolbox. We've been very successful, but we're missing a tool that could be critically important for large employment opportunities, and we're doing it in a much more thoughtful way than we've done in the past. Let's make sure we're doing continuous improvement.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about when we say investment, it's kind of code word for money, and we mentioned billions. So in Evan, your report, it said $4 billion that we're going to need for infrastructure.
What's $4 billion amongst friends?
Let's just start passing the hat. But it does lead to a very serious question of, Is there the political will to start to set aside that kind of money or make that kind of investment?
So we knew that a $4 billion number would get everybody's attention. And there's no suggestion in this report that there's $4 billion available every year for the next 50 years to solve these problems. But that's the math. And the fact is that the math in most of these cases has been done for a long time. When I first found out that this gentleman was running for governor, I gave him the name of a good psychiatrist and then gave him a copy of the TF2 report from 2008 that laid out exactly what it would take to get our road infrastructure and bridge infrastructure built to good, great, or fair condition. All those statistics and numbers aren't different today. It's inflation that's impacted them. We know what it takes. So there was legislation that was passed. And in some cases, people think that roads and bridges are now fully funded. They aren't. The governor and the legislature were good enough to pass roads legislation to secure over a period of 5 years $1.2 billion of incremental spending, which is about half of what we need. And not all of it is funded. Half of it has to be funded out of the general fund. But setting that aside, let me ask a question. Did anybody notice anything different when they went to the gas station in January, February, or March? Now what? Yeah. Guess what? You're paying 7 cents a gallon more at the pump. 7 cents a gallon is $350 million a year. That's not chump change, okay? Everywhere I've gone, I've asked that question. Now, had it been 15 cents, would you have noticed? Maybe not. 20 cents, maybe. But the point is that that kind of expenditure, 7 cents a gallon, isn't something that most of us feel. It's important that we get good value out of it, but we can afford to spend more on infrastructure. And the fact is that we're going to have to do it. Now, should we be paying some sort of fee for the use and extraction of water? Should we be paying some sort of miles traveled fee for cars and trucks? How are we going to do this? When you break it all down, okay, we have 10 million people we're going to have 10 million people in the state. And so you can do the math in terms of per person. It's really, in terms of dollars and cents per month, per family, per person, to fund infrastructure and get things going. It's not going to cost us that much per family. It's $20 a month, that kind of number. B, we need to invest, because that's the term you use, now. You take the life of a road, for example. At 10 years for the life of an average road, if you invest $1, okay, that road will last another 10 years. If you don't invest $1 after 10 years, it's going to cost you 3, 4, 5 times as much when you get to year 20. So it's much better to invest to patch the roof, repair a pipe before you have to replace the roof, or move out of the house and repair the floors. It's just basic. So we need to do this. We need to understand that that's investment. And I think that the value today that we could get out of bonding, for example, and here's the numbers, and he's the expert at this, but $1 billion today is $50 million a year for the next 30 years. You could raise $1 billion today, make these investments, get a good return, get started in the B department, the billions of dollars department, by committing $50 million a year for the next 30 years. We can commit that kind of money in our budget, I think, and we can show that it's a good investment. So we've got to have clean water. Kids and grandkids, they have to have clean water. We have to have clean beaches, all right? And we have to leave an infrastructure behind for the next generation that'll support good economy, good jobs, good education. We can't have quality of life without good infrastructure. So we're just going to have to figure this out, and we're going to have to pay a little bit for it. Give the people what they want, make sure that they know what the value for money is, and that's how the billions of dollars, if you will, get handled.
We'll end up getting there. So Governor Snyder, then, what's the disconnect, you believe, then, if people want this, if they want to pay for better infrastructure? What kind of conversations are you having with the legislature right now and the leadership for some kind of Michigan infrastructure fund, or where are you right now?
Yeah, that's one of the things we had as part of the budget in terms of setting aside some dollars to help really seed this, because you're not going to solve it in 1 year. We should be proud, though. The $1.2 billion was a big step forward. Yep. It actually has an inflation indicator, and that was one of the major issues. And that's for the roads, the transportation part of it. But we should be setting aside some dollars to help seed the water and sewer piece, some of these other broadband issues. In many cases, when you talk about the $4 billion, it gets back to these 3,300 organizations, too. It's not all about what the state government's going to do. Many of these are through municipal authorities for water and sewer. If you get to the utilities, again, we have privately owned utilities, and we have a regulatory commission structure in this state. When you talk about those costs, broadband's a hybrid, where we have both systems. So it will be through multiple mechanisms, and those discussions are going on with, I would say, the broadband one being a critical one, along with the water and sewer issues, because obviously we've seen problems. Flint, but you look at Macomb and the sinkhole, we need to be doing more work to map the system and investigate the quality that's in today. And that's what I hope some of those seed dollars could be used for, that we could set aside.
Tom, talking about investing and looking at education, do you think we're funding our public schools the way we should be right now? And what kind of extra investment do we need here when we're talking about spending some money?
Yeah, well, what we're doing is talking about investment in human capital and similar type of investment with the infrastructure. And no, it's not. In fact, the formulaic basis upon which we are operating at K through 12 is 25 years old. And we have to look ahead, because it's not a one-size-fits-all in K through 12 anyway. Some of the more economically challenged communities need more to impact those children that need that extra effort to push them up through the pathway. This pipeline has some sieves in it, and we're losing talent along the way. So we really have to look at this in an investment strategy. And in the report, we have 4 areas of immediate action that we need to take right now. We have costs, as the governor's pointed out, short-term, intermediate, long-term. We cost that out as well. So no, we're not investing, and we're not maintaining at all the human capital infrastructure necessary for the Third Commission to see its benefits as well. So, but we have looked at this in a holistic way, and this framework, and when we do the investment strategies, will reap us the outcomes that we want for the state of Michigan. That's a vital and vibrant economy.
How important do you think it is to challenge the governance in terms of looking at education? You know, critics have said we don't have a cohesive strategy when it comes to education in this state, in terms of talking about what the school board, the state school board, if it should be partially appointed, if it should be abolished altogether. How important do you think it is to attack that part of it?
It's critically important, because that's all part of the governance. We have to have the structure to enable the outcomes that we want from a strategic sense. And so we put 3 or 4 models out there that would look at the K through 12. And the state board and the policymakers can take that as, really, in my mind, as a gift, saying we need to not go past what we have seen in the rearview mirror, but we have to go forward as well, and governance is critically important.
Sandy, I'm going to end with you, because we only have about 2 minutes left here. In looking at all of these pieces now and putting them together, that we have this roadmap now in front of you saying, all right, now go execute. What kind of strength it has to be behind this now to say, this is indeed, this is not a report that's going to sit on a shelf, collect dust, or say, that was really great, but in 2 more years, when we have a different administration possibly, we're going to do another study taking a look at our education process. What is the will and the strength that has to be behind executing now what we have in front of us?
So the nice thing that about the charge the governor gave us was that it was completely nonpartisan. It was completely all about Michigan's future, and all 3 of our reports are very much data-based. And the nice thing about that is that all 3 of the reports set out a very kind of specific framework for future legislators to ask themselves one question. Is the piece of legislation in front of me today advancing the necessary things to achieve either the infrastructure report requirements, the education report requirements, or the economic commission report requirements? If it's not, then the legislature needs to ask themselves the question, Why are we spending time on this? Why are we spending taxpayers' time on this? Because we know through all of these 3 reports that the data shows this is what is needed to drive a prosperous economy, a healthy set of communities, and successful individuals in those communities. I mean, these are not open to political debate. And so this is not looked at left or right, conservative, liberal. And so if the governor who follows Rick Snyder and the legislators starting today ask themselves that question, we will succeed.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say, Christy, is it's everyone here taking ownership of the report. Because it's important that the government has its role to play, but this is about Michiganders taking ownership of this. And if I looked at this audience and the people listening and watching, almost everyone here is involved in some community organization, some civic organization, some business organization. And I think it's important that hopefully many of us take the time to look at these 3 reports. And as you have a dialogue or discussion about what you're doing in your organization, reference these reports. Going to Sandy's point, how are you embracing it? This is an organization as they do their pillars. I hope next year and the year after, some of the pillar development will be based off looking at these reports to say, are we moving the needle in some of these areas or not? So it's to make it a living document where it's not just relying on a handful of people, a few dozen people in Lansing, but to make it so it's part of who we are because it's our future.
And we will continue to watch and see how it all unfolds. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. Evan Weiner, Governor Snyder, Thomas Haas, and Sandy Baruah. Thank you very much.